All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Court Tompkins. I'm CTO here at IP Configure, and today we're going to talk about everything that is new in the 24.9 release of Orchid VMS. So got some slides. We'll go through a couple of live demos. If anybody has any questions as I'm talking, we do have Q&A enabled here in the webinar, so please throw your questions in there, and yep, we'll go through the Q&A at the end. All right, so let's get started. Orchid 24.9 was released recently, a few weeks ago. Just as a little bit of a refresher, Orchid is sort of a family of products. We have Orchid Recorder, which is the NVR that typically you would have on site, and then Orchid Fusion and Orchid Hybrid are our management servers. Orchid Hybrid being hosted by IP Configure in the cloud, Orchid Fusion being another way to host a management server on-prem within your own infrastructure. These release notes apply to all of the Orchid family of products. And again, this is the refresher. So we've got the Orchid Recorder is the NVR, and then Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid is the management server. Most of the features we're talking about today are going to apply regardless of which interface you're using, whether you're using the main Orchid Fusion or Hybrid interface, or whether you're on site looking at just the recorder interface. When a feature is only available in one or the other, I will mention that. All right, so to get started, one of the big new features that is available in Orchid 24.9 is we can now communicate with OnVIF cameras over HTTPS. So previously we could only communicate with cameras over HTTP. Generally, that has not been a huge issue. Most of the time, Orchid is communicating with cameras over a private camera-only network, but with 24.9, we can now use a encrypted communication channel. So the one caveat to this is that HTTPS does have to be enabled on every camera that Orchid is registering and communicating with via HTTPS. That means that certificates need to be provisioned on the camera. Most folks aren't willing to do this. It is sort of a fair amount of work. Although a number of camera manufacturers do provide tools, make it easy to deploy self-signed certificates to cameras or to deploy like a wildcard certificate to your camera. The idea is for HTTPS to work, the certificate has to be attached to the camera's host name. So you would need to, set up DNS so that you have camera1.yourdomain.com, camera2.yourdomain.com, and you would deploy a yourdomain.com certificate to all of your cameras in order to use HTTPS. So it's definitely a worthwhile thing to do. Encryption is good. We certainly recommend it. But yeah, can be difficult on a big camera network. But if you've done that or are interested in doing that, Orchid now supports recording cameras with HTTPS, and this provides security for that configuration channel so that the passwords you transmit to the camera, all of the configuration traffic, that is now encrypted. So I've got a screenshot here of the camera registration dialog from Orchid. This is going to be the same whether or not you're an Orchid Recorder or Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid. And now when I go to register a camera, we have this new connection preference option, and I can select either HTTP or HTTPS. If you're doing bulk registration, you see there's a checkbox there where if HTTPS is unavailable, maybe you've got 32 cameras and 31 of them support HTTPS, you can go ahead and select all of those, hit that box, and the one camera that doesn't support HTTPS will fall back to HTTP, and we'll give you feedback as to whether it was registered with HTTP or HTTPS. The other option that can be used here is we could ignore TLS certificate validation. And the TLS certificate validation is the part of HTTPS that matches the name on the certificate with the name by which we're accessing the camera. So for example, if you have a certificate for, again, yourdomain.com, but you don't have DNS set up and you're just accessing the camera by its IP address, the TLS certificate validation will fail because the name that you're accessing the camera with and the name on the certificate don't match. That may or may not be important to you. The channel will still be encrypted. You'll open yourself to maybe like a man-in-the-middle attack where you've got somebody who's sort of spoofing the actual camera and isn't the actual camera. But there are cases where you're not able to set up those DNS names and you want to ignore the TLS certificate validation. If you check that, we'll still be able to communicate with the camera, even though the camera's address that you're accessing it doesn't match the host name on the certificate. If you leave that unchecked, then the camera won't work unless those two things match. All right, so that is OnVIF over HTTPS. Again, that configuration channel is now encrypted. The next big improvement in Orchid 24.9 is we have had a ongoing and continuing multi-release effort to try and improve the way that customers install Orchid updates. And we really want that to be as painless and automatic a process as possible. In previous releases, we have added support for automated updates that can be configured within Orchid itself for Ubuntu operating systems or Debian operating systems, Ubuntu being sort of a flavor of the Linux Debian operating system. In 24.9, we have now extended that support to Red Hat. So customers using Red Hat or Red Hat compatible distributions, like for example, CentOS, can now go into Orchid and configure automatic software updates via Red Hat. For customers using our Orchid hybrid cloud services, we set that up automatically. For customers hosting their own Orchid Fusion installations, they're now able to do that through the advanced settings dialog. The a lot of these properties are set by default though, so that if you have a new installation, you will use ipconfigure's update servers, and you can install updated versions of Red Hat or updated versions of Orchid through Red Hat package management. So yeah, with this release, we now have automated update support for Ubuntu operating systems, for Red Hat operating systems. The big one that's left out is Windows, and that is something that is under active development and will be coming soon, automated updates for Windows. All right. Next, this is a relatively small thing, but I think is something that is a nice quality of life improvement, is that we have changed the way search works in the advanced settings dialog. So interacting with the search box in advanced settings now behaves in a more standard way. You get real-time filtering, you get partial matches. Previously, the advanced settings dialog, like the search box, was maybe a little clunky. If I started to type in a property, for example, maybe I want to change my archive cleaner settings in Orchid Recorder. If I typed in archive cleaner, I've got a drop down list with maybe the 10 archive cleaner settings, and I had to pick one, and then my list of settings is just the one that I picked. We now can do partial search results, and I see a big list of all of the archive cleaner settings. I can update them all in one go. Again, nice sort of quality of life improvement there. And then there's a bunch of small bug fixes. I will call out a few of them, both bug fixes and improvements in the 24.9 release. So we're always spending a lot of time working on camera compatibility. So we had some camera compatibility improvements for Vigilon cameras, Vividtech cameras, Hanwha cameras. A lot of these were related to like ONVIF metadata events that we receive from these cameras, as well as some of the advanced video encoding options on these cameras, your sort of smart stream, zip stream type features. We have some compatibility improvements for those. 24.9, we also had a improvement or fix to the way exporting audit logs work. Before 24.9, your audit log search options wouldn't always be included when you exported audit logs, so you might get more audit logs than you wanted. 24.9, that's fixed. We also have some improvements to the DWARP configuration. Before 24.9, you could get in a situation where the warped version of a DWARP image, that is that circular image here. Let me see if I can find you an example. Let's go down to, a DWARP camera like this one, for example. So the undwarped version might be 180 degrees flipped from the warped version. Before 24.9, there were some cameras that just sort of had this quirk where your dewarped video was upside down and they were sort of out of sync. So now you have the ability to change whether that dewarped video is flipped 180 degrees or not. That is a camera setting here. I'll show you what that looks like. So if I go down onto my fisheye dewarp settings and edit that, for a ceiling camera, it really doesn't matter because your view is always straight down. But for a wall-mounted camera, you now have the ability to specify whether it is a wall mount camera or a flipped wall mount camera. And again, for customers that had their wall mount 360 camera 180 degrees flipped, we now have a fix for that. In 24.9, we also have some performance improvements to Orchid's thumbnail search. So as a reminder, let's take a look at what thumbnail search looks like. I've got a camera here on the stage. I can hit this magnifying glass to bring up some search options. I will hit this grid. This brings up our thumbnail search. So we now have some performance improvements to the way these thumbnail images show up. As a reminder, what I'm looking at now are hours in the current day. where motion has been detected. So we had our first motion event at the 7 a.m. hour. I can click into that. Now I see minutes where motion was detected. So 7:55, 7:56, and I can click on any one of those minutes and begin playback. So that's our thumbnail search, and we have some performance improvements for that thumbnail search. It's a little more responsive, a little faster. Also in 24.9, we changed the default capture.audio behavior. That's an advanced setting in Orchid. But what we changed was for installs before 24.9, if a camera sent audio to Orchid, we would record it, sort of irrespective of how audio was configured on the camera. That is to say, if we had turned audio off on the camera through the settings, but the camera was sending audio anyway, Orchid would save that audio and record it. That's had proven to be problematic for customers who are concerned about saving audio, for example, in two-party consent states. So now with 24.9, by default, for any new install on 24.9 or later, the default behavior is Orchid will only save audio if audio is configured in the OnVIF settings. So if a camera sends audio, but the OnVIF settings say that audio should be off in the camera settings dialog, we will now drop that audio. We won't save that audio. Older installations can go turn that option on. That's something we covered, I think, in our 24.6 training, but we've changed the default behavior now. All right, the next sort of big thing, it's a big building block, if not necessarily a huge feature, is we now have resource tags in Orchid Recorder. So these are tags that can be added to cameras and to servers to sort of group things together. So for example, here on our demo system, I'm going to go back into the admin settings. I have a number of cameras in our warehouse where we assemble our steel fin servers, and I can edit camera tags and, for example, add a assembly tag to every one of the cameras in that warehouse. I can do a similar thing at the server level. So that is camera set. Those are camera tags. Let me go into my advanced server configuration. I can also add server tags. Tags can both have a name as well as optionally a value. So here I have a Southeast tag all by itself. You'll see some examples here where I have a serial tag with a value, a region tag with a value, a location tag with a value. So that's something new in 24.9. It may be valuable to you just to help you sort of organize resources. It really is a building block for our events, triggers, and actions system. I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of where we're going with that and why tags are so important. But this is a first early step, as we now have the ability to tag resources in Orchid Recorder. Those are cameras, servers, as well as our event subscriptions, which has to do with the way we store OnVIF metadata. That's really more of a behind the scenes thing. But in terms of user facing features, yep, we now have resource tags for cameras and for servers. All right, some small usability improvements in the UI. Let's see. So there are some navigation layout changes. So if I go back to the user interface, you'll notice our hamburger menu up here at the top. The order has changed a little bit. We've kind of rationalized the order of items. This event section, I believe, used to be farther down on the menu, or and library is farther down on the menu. We've moved sort of the user-facing ways that you interact with video. What we think you're going to be doing most often in Orchid, those are now at the top. Stage, events, library. Those are the three major ways that folks interact with video in Orchid. So we have brought those to the top. We've also changed the library export format default. Previously, by default, video would be exported to the library as an MP4 file. MP4 file is a standards-based file, but it doesn't always support all of the codecs that our customers have deployed. So there's some audio codecs that are not fully supported by MP4. So now we've changed that. Our default export library format is MKV. MKV is a similar standards-based video format, but it really doesn't have any codec limitations. So it's a better way to save video in the library. Every video codec, every audio codec that Orchid supports is supported by MKV. All right. So SAML attributes. This is another big thing. It's actually new in 24.6.1. So we did an interim hotfix release before this 24.9 release, but we haven't talked about that in a webinar. So I think it's worth mentioning here. SAML attributes is another way to set up user permissions in Orchid outside of just groups, like your sort of old school Active Directory groups. And this is a request that came to us from a number of our really large enterprise customers who have large numbers of locations. So, say hundreds, thousands, in some cases, over 10,000 locations. And what we heard from them was that configuring user permissions based on something like Active Directory group membership is actually really challenging because you would have a group like, say, loss prevention or security who would need maybe two or three groups per individual location, right? Maybe you had a list of folks at each location that needed to view video, another list of folks who needed to be able to move PTZs and do exports, and maybe another list of people who needed administrative rights at each location. So if you had 1,000 locations and three groups per location, that's 3,000 Active Directory groups. And often that's difficult to do, and it's sort of difficult to ask IT to make that many Active Directory groups for you. So we were asked again by a couple of customers to come up with a way to set up folks' permissions within Orchid Fusion using a single sign-on mechanism like Azure, Ping, or Okta in a way that didn't need a company's IT group to go out and create 3,000 Active Directory groups. So in 24.6.1, and of course this is also available in 24.9, we created a new way to define user permissions or define who can be a member of a permission group based on what are called SAML attributes. So SAML is the single sign-on mechanism that Orchid uses to integrate with single sign-on services like Okta and Ping and Azure in Google Workspace. And large enterprises often have additional attributes that are attached to each person's account. And those attributes might be things like, let's say in a retail environment, might be things like the store number of the store that somebody works with, the district number that they're in, the zone number that they're in, maybe their job role. So beginning in 24.6.1, administrators can define what additional attributes Fusion should look for, or Orchid Hybrid should look for on people's accounts when we're defining their group membership. And we can now set up Orchid Fusion permission groups to look at those additional attributes. So for example, I've got a screenshot here, but let's go into the user interface. We can look at it. I'm in Orchid Hybrid. I am going to go to a permission group, pick a permission group at random here. I'm going to edit this permission group. I'm going to go to my external group mappings, and let's say I want my Google SAML users. So we've set up this demo site to allow folks attached to IPconfigure's Google Workspace domain to log in with their Google single sign-on with SAML, and I can match Google users to this permission group. That is, any Google user who matches these attributes that I'm going to set up is going to get access to well, all servers and all cameras in this example, based on how I've set these permissions here. So if I go back to my external group mappings, I've got it set up where I can match users based on whether they're in some group, like an Active Directory group, but I can also do other mappings as well. So for example, if this was store 57, I can now say if the user has that store 57 attribute, and I can add another attribute as well. Maybe there was a job role and they have the job role manager. Now they have access to whatever I've defined here in this permission set, and I haven't required IT or anybody else at my organization to go make a special store 57 Orchid Managers Active Directory group. So yeah, that is the SAML attribute mappings, new in 24.9, again, technically in 24.6.1. Let's see, one more user-facing feature that we think is pretty interesting is we have now added the ability for folks to see motion events, visualize motion events within the Orchid user interface. So here I am on the Orchid stage. You'll see I've got some red marks down here at the bottom of the screen on my timeline bar. Every one of those red marks means that motion has happened. But before 24.9, I couldn't necessarily easily see where motion has happened or where the system thinks that motion has happened. The system being really one of two different sources of motion events within Orchid, one being Orchid's motion detection engine, or server-side motion detection, or two being camera-side motion detection. So particularly with camera side motion detection, often there are configurable motion detection settings, and we want folks to be able to tune those motion detection settings. And in order to do that effectively, you need to be able to see where motion is detected. So in 24.9, we now have that ability. We can get there by going to the player statistics. That's the little graph here in the top right of my player. And we've got a link here, show motion regions. So if I click that, I go back to the player and I now get a bounding box showing exactly where Orchid has been told motion has happened. And again, that's either based on Orchid's server side motion detection. In this case, for this camera, I believe this is maybe an axis camera, and I have configured camera side motion detection. So this is Axis's camera side motion detection. So in this example, you can see this blue bounding box. This is where the camera has told me that motion has been detected. So this is great, again, for folks setting up camera side analytics, camera side motion detection. If you're getting too many motion events, maybe you feel like you're missing motion events, you can turn this on. It's a great diagnostic tool for system managers and administrators to really visualize their motion events. We expect to see more of this in the future in Orchid, particularly as we continue to commit to providing more opportunity for users to interact with metadata and analytic events. We expect that this will become more of a user-facing feature, but for now, we see this as mostly something that's going to be used by the administrators setting up, maintaining their system. All right, so that is WebRTC motion events. And then lastly, I think this might be the last point. In 24.9, we now have an improved talk-down API endpoint. So we already have talk-down in Orchid. That is the ability in the user interface to, talk into a microphone like I have on here and send audio out to a speaker that's connected to a camera to, shout at somebody through the camera or deliver an announcement, something like that. Before 24.9, that mechanism was mediated entirely through WebRTC. That's the streaming standards-based streaming technology that Orchid uses. And before 24.9, third-party integrators, technology partners could send talk down using that WebRTC channel. Maybe a little more difficult to set up than just doing an HTTP post to an API endpoint, just like sending an MP3 file or a WAV file. So beginning in 24.9, we now have some new API endpoints that allows technology partners to do just that, to send pre-recorded audio clips to a camera speaker via an HTTP call. So again, something that I think really makes our technology partners' lives easier if they want to send audio to Orchid outside of the Orchid user interface. So that is new in 24.9. All right, so that is all for 24.9. Always like to give folks a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of what might be coming in the next release, 24.12, and the releases after. And really our focus here at IP Configure is continuing to work on Orchid's events, triggers, and action system, with bulk configuration and administration really being a key focus. And I spoke earlier about how resource tags were part of that vision, and that is definitely our big focus for the next release. And kind of the vision that we have is we would like an administrator for a really large system, say 10,000 cameras, to set up an analytic. Let's give an example. To set up an analytic that detects a person at a location entrance after hours, right? That's sort of or one of the user stories that we've been thinking about. So if somebody has 10,000 locations and maybe 2 or 3 doors per location, that is a phenomenal task to be able to set that up yourself. And we're really looking at resource tags to build to make that possible. So we imagine a circumstance in which a system administrator can go into Orchid Fusion and set up a tagging rule so that any camera on any server with the word entrance or lobby or front door or side door is automatically, any one of those cameras automatically gets a tag labeled entrance, right? So now all of my cameras that I want to set up this person detection analytic on will have this entrance tag. I can then run a report. So across all 10,000 locations, give me a list of all of the servers where no camera has an entrance tag. Maybe there's been a misspelling or something, and there's 20 of those servers. I can go into those sites, either correct the misspelling, manually add the entrance tag on the cameras that I'm interested in. So now across all 10,000 locations, all of the cameras that I want to do this person detection analytic on has a entrance tag on it. I now create a trigger. Again, this is part of our events, triggers, and action system. I want to create a trigger where anytime a person detection analytic within this time range generates an event on a camera that has this entrance tag, I want to get an email. And the idea there is the system will determine that, well, there's 15 different camera models that have this entrance tag, and you can go through that list, winnow it down, get a list of the analytics that are available on each one of those 15 different cameras, pick the person detection analytic that you want. And the idea is this really big effort that might span 20,000, 30,000 individual cameras, a single administrator can sit down and do using this events, triggers, and action system, set all this stuff up within a matter of minutes. So that's the goal. Something that we think is really important, fair amount of work, and it really, really has been our focus and will continue to be one of our major focuses for the next few releases. But we do still endeavor to kind of walk and chew gum at the same time. So there are other initiatives, obviously. Automatic updates for Windows is something I mentioned. That's a big focus for us. We expect that to be coming soon. Frame by frame navigation, something we begin seeing requests for. Time lapse exports, also something we expect to see coming in the next release or two. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is some of the things that you might expect to see soon. All right, so that is it. I will hit the Q&A stuff here at the end, but I just want to remind everybody that IP Configure has a lot of resources for Orchid users. We've got a training site with a lot of content on it. It's updated regularly. That's training.ipconfigure.com. We've got really detailed user manuals that go into a lot more depth on these features than I'm able to in a webinar like this. That's manuals.ipconfigure.com. And we have a fantastic support team. They're available from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern every weekday. You can submit a ticket to them, support.ipconfigure.com, or give them a call at our toll-free number. They're all based here at our headquarters office in Norfolk, Virginia, and they would be very happy to help you out with any issues or questions you might have. All right, so I think that is it. Let me pull up the Q&A. See if we have any questions here. Looks like there are a couple. So somebody has asked for the OnVIF HTTPS feature. When I update my software, will I have to go back in and recheck all the cameras for HTTPS? No, the answer is no. That's a persistent camera setting, just like any of the other camera settings, no different than setting the resolution or the frame rate or something like that. Let's see, on WebRTC overlays, are there performance impacts when using WebRTC overlays, especially with camera side motion detection? No. So those WebRTC bounding boxes that we saw on the Orchid stage, that's information that Orchid already has. So that's information that gets stored in Orchid's database. We've got a pretty sophisticated sort of geospatial type database that we store motion events in within Orchid. That's what enables our smart search functionality. So all of that bounding box information, all that spatial information is already there. This WebRTC overlay is just a way for us to visualize that now. Really doesn't add any additional processing requirements on top of Orchid at all. Let's see. Is there a limitation on the amount of tags that can be applied? No, practically no. Can tags only be applied to cameras and servers? Yes. Yeah. Right now, camera servers and also event subscriptions, which again, that's sort of just some behind the scenes stuff in terms of how we are implementing events, triggers, and actions, this automated system in Orchid that makes these camera metadata events actionable within Orchid. Yeah, there certainly might be use cases for tagging other types of resources in Orchid. I can imagine tagging users, tagging permission groups, tagging camera groups, maps, things like that. So I'm sure we will find good use cases for all of that. All right, somebody's trying to nail us down a little bit. Is there a timeline for introducing Windows automatic updates? Yeah, it is a stretch goal for the next release, for the 24.12 release. I think it's likely that we will have automated Windows updates in 24.12. It's not in 24.12, but will almost certainly be in our next release in Q1 of 2025. And I think this is the last one for audio recordings. Somebody has asked, can we record the message on Orchid VMS? No, not currently. I'm sure that will come at some point. It really is just an API level feature where you've got to have an MP3 file or a WAV file already on your computer, and you can push that up to Orchid through the API, and Orchid will play that audio out over the camera. I can certainly imagine a future in which a user is able to record clips or upload clips, keep that in an audio clip library in Orchid, and play one of those pre-recorded saved audio clips. So. Yep. I expect that will come, but for right now, it is just API based. All right, so that is all we've got for 24.9. Definitely thank everybody for joining me. Thank you for being an Orchid customer or a somebody who's interested in Orchid, an Orchid enthusiast, and hope to see you in the 24.12 release webinar. Thanks a lot.